Well, hi, everybody. I'm Nate Eaton, and I'm so excited today to be talking with Matt Murphy. You've probably seen him on 2020 on ABC News talking about some very high profile crimes over the past few years. What you may not know, what I didn't know until earlier this year when we met at CrimeCon, Matt, is that you were a prosecutor for several years in California, and you have a new book coming out here in just a few days. It's called The Book of Murder: A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. So, welcome, Matt. Thank you for chatting with me today. Matt, let's go back. I do want to obviously talk about the book, but let's go back to your job as a prosecutor. Tell everybody what you did and what that job entailed.
Yeah, so I was a deputy DA in Orange County, California, like Real Housewives. I I stumbled into that as a career choice. I went to UCSB for undergrad, which is UC Santa Barbara, and I wound up getting sort of recruited by the FBI, by a plaintiff's firm in Orange County, and then the DA's office came and did interviews. And I decided to go with the DA. The end of my first day as a junior law clerk, this is 1992, I knew it's what I wanted to do. So I went in with a sort of a 3-year plan that I was going to learn how to try cases, because of course you can do that in 3 years, and then go out and be a real lawyer doing big civil cases or something. And my 3-year plan turned into 26 years. They start you out in misdemeanors, and what they don't tell you at the beginning is that as fun as it is and as fascinating as it is, it only gets better over time. So they started out in misdemeanors, then they sent me to juvenile court for about a year. Then you go back to misdemeanors, and then for me, it was 37 misdemeanor jury trials. Then I went to what's called our felony panel, where all you do is you just try generic felonies. So a generic felony would be like a robbery, drug sales, felony DUIs. They're generic because they're not assigned to a specialized unit. And then once you're done with the panel, that's another year. It's almost like an NFL draft where you get picked up to go to a specialized unit. So they're called vertical units, and vertical units in Orange County are like major fraud, gangs, sexual assault, and environmental. There's a bunch of different options and a bunch of different paths you can take. They took me and they put me in the sexual assault unit, where I spent just under 4 years prosecuting rapists and child molesters. And then I got a call. It's almost like the call you're almost like in the minors in baseball, right? I got a call to go to the big leagues, to the homicide unit. And the word vertical in Orange County, the idea is that you're assigned a certain section of the city, or the certain section of the county, that is. So when I got to homicide, I had Newport Beach, Laguna Beach, Costa Mesa, and Irvine. So any murders that happen in those cities were automatically mine. They give you your own DA investigator, who's a police officer, and it's like a partner, and you team up. So Orange County has a population of 3 million people, and we had 8 of us, sometimes 9 in that unit. So it was a very small group, and essentially you get the call in the middle of the night and you go to the murder scenes. And your job there as a prosecutor is to assist the detectives, read search warrants and anything else. Basically, you're there to try to help if you can. You don't supervise the investigation; they do that, but you're there in real time learning about the case. So you're literally there. Once the scene has been processed and CSI is done making sure that you can't contaminate anything, you're there before the bodies are moved. You see you see everything, and then it goes up. You sit down with the detectives, you figure out what the evidence is, you decide when there's enough to charge somebody. You decide what charges, then you handle everything in court from that point on. So you're there that night, and then the lead detective who's assigned to the case is with you all the way through the end of trial. So the idea is the prosecutor's there with the detective the night of the murder or the day of the murder, whatever it is, and then that same detective is with you, 2, 3, 5, 10 years later, sometimes sitting with you at counsel table during the jury trial. all the way through sentencing. So that's the vertical concept. Most DAs don't do it that way. Most DAs offices do like an assembly line thing where one DA, the police do the investigation without any involvement from the DA, and then the gets put on somebody's desk, and one DA will review it for filing, and another DA might do the preliminary hearing, and then it goes to a third DA for for the trial. That's the way. That's the typical sort of outline that most offices use. And I think the vertical prosecution when it comes to murder cases is the only way to do it. And you wind up being a lot more efficient, a lot more effective in front of juries, in front of judges. The detectives trust you more. So if there's something that you see that might be a little concerning, maybe with a legal issue, or your job is to ensure that the rights of any criminal defendant are scrupulously adhered to through every step. And if you're involved from the beginning, you can have influence on that, especially when the detectives trust you. So it's
Right.
better for the defendants. It's better for the victims. First thing I'd always do is sit down with the victim's family and give them my personal cell number. And that's how the DA's office used to work in Orange County.
So, any idea how many crime scenes you've personally been to?
Well, homicide scenes, I think about around 100. I think over this. I spent 17 years in the homicide unit. So I spent 4 in sexual assault, 17 in homicide, and yeah, for those cities, Costa Mesa, you're good for 2 or 3 every year. Irvine, maybe 1 a year. So it worked out to. I mean, when I do the math, and I'm terrible at math, yeah, it's about 100, maybe a little shy of 100 different murder scenes that I've personally gone to.
So before you were prosecuting homicides, was that kind of your goal, or is it once you get in and you're working for the office, that's the thing that all the prosecutors in the office are hoping to get to?
I think every young DA at one point or another wants to go to the homicide unit. So there's about 300 lawyers in the unit, and there's about 8 in homicide. And when you're a law clerk, and even a young DA, the good supervisors will tell you, go watch people that are very experienced. And that was always you want to watch something interesting, right? So we would go in and watch the homicide case of the day, and we'd see these people. There's a guy named Chris Evans, who's now a Superior Court judge. And the guy's just, the amount of talent from that guy, and you're just starstruck as a 25-year-old kid.
Right.
And you see them sort of practice this craft. And I did I did 37 misdemeanor jury trials. I did 24 on the felony panel. I did 17 in sexual assault. So by the time anybody gets to homicide, they're very experienced trial lawyers. And so as a young lawyer, you can watch them do that. And man, I think the first murder I watched, it was like, that's what I want to do. That's where I want to go. Because you see, in your mind anyway, you see it's like it's the good guys versus the bad guys is what you feel like. You've got a defense lawyer, and with the benefit of a lot of time and wisdom, most criminal defense lawyers are very good at what they do, and they're dedicated to their clients, and they do a great job. But if the police have done their job right, and the prosecutor's done their job right, they've got the right person sitting there. So the defense is usually, the way it should work is they should be in the wrong, because it means the system's working. The right guy was arrested, the right charges were filed. So you see this, and man, I had a hunger for it from my days as a baby DA. A lot of people lose that fire. A lot of people along the way, they learn that the trial work is really hard, and it tends to take over your life while you're in trial. And it's not the best thing for interpersonal relationships. A lot of people decide they'd rather be spend more time with their kids. And, I was just kind of all in, especially by the time I got to homicide.
Yeah.
So,
So you covered some of the craziest cases. By the way, was that office the ones that did O.J. Simpson?
no, that was LA County.
Oh,
LA
LA
County.
County.
So Orange County is one county to the south. And yeah, we didn't lose our high profile cases down there.
Right.
Yeah,
You were there, right? If you said 92 when you started, because OJ was, late 90s. So anyway.
Oh no, yeah, I was brand new baby DA when OJ happened. And I actually went up trying a case against Christopher Darden when he was a defense lawyer. We did a murder case against each other. And very nice man. Uh, didn't go his way. But yeah, even as a baby lawyer, I might have had 2 or 3 trials under my belt at that point. I watched that closing, and Johnny Cochran was amazing. And we all watched it. Chris Darden just didn't match him style wise or effect wise.
Right. So in your book, you talk about some of the most notorious cases that you've covered. Tell me about, I mean, Skylar DeLeon, is that how you say it?
Yep.
DeLeon, Rodney Alcala, uh,
Yes.
Dirty John Meehan, and many others. Is there one that I don't want to say is your favorite, but one that, sticks out to you that really changed you as a person?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. There are different kinds of murders. Like a baby death, for example, somebody that's a child abuse death, or I had a Russian mafia hit on one, and gang murders. They're all so different, but certain murder cases are just on a scale of 1 to 10, they're like an 11. It's like that old Spinal Tap scene. They're so bad that they definitely you definitely wake up in the middle of the night when you have those, and it's not what people think necessarily. A lot of people think if you go to a murder scene and you see somebody that's been brutally murdered, that's the nightmare. But it's not. That's clinical, believe it or not. Especially after you do 1 or 2, it becomes very clinical very quickly. And the nightmares come from the sort of the enormity of your responsibility, if that makes sense. Like I went to one scene once where it was Thanksgiving, and I got actually called out of Thanksgiving dinner for that one, which my girlfriend at the time was not a huge fan of. But I got to leave in the middle of dinner. We've got one in Irvine, and we go in, and this poor woman she's been stabbed with a screwdriver, and she was making dinner, and there's a disco CD on repeat, and we walk in, and there's disco music. This poor woman's dead, but I was there when her daughter came home, and I was there, and I saw the notification to the family, which is something that DAs don't do. That's the grim task of police officers to do that. And just the grief of that young woman in that one case, it's sort of haunted me ever since. She shows up thinking she's coming home for Thanksgiving, and instead she finds out that her mom has just been murdered. And I saw her, and that kind of stuff wakes you up in the middle of the night, because when you're trying a case like that, if you screw up, that guy gets away with it. And it is, you owe a debt to that family, you want to bring them justice, as weird as that might sound. And it's incredibly important for them, and you just don't want to let anybody down. And that's where the nightmares came from for me, at least. So one case, like, Alcala was really something. That was the dating game killer. He kidnapped, raped, and murdered a 12-year-old girl, and it just destroyed her family. Her mom struggled with addiction after that, and they just all it destroyed the family. And then there was, of course, Hawks. That's the one with Skylar DeLeon. That was the couple, Tom and Jackie, that were taken out thinking that they were selling their yacht. And what it was a very elaborate conspiracy to murder them and get access to their bank accounts, and also take their boat. And that one was, boy, that one will always be with me. But it's kind of hard to pick one on the when they're all kind of an 11 on that 1 to 10 scale of just awfulness. They're all so different. But yeah, but at the same time, it's almost like your faith in humanity is challenged when you walk in and you see something horrible like that poor woman on Thanksgiving.
Right.
But then immediately you see these crime lab personnel that roll in, and they don't complain. and they're there at 3 in the morning and they're doing their job. And then you see the detectives that haven't slept in 18 hours that are also into it. They want to help. And so you see this horrible thing followed immediately by a whole bunch of really good people who want to get it right, including, ultimately the juries and the trial judges. And it sort of like your faith in humanity gets challenged, and then it immediately gets restored by all these wonderful people that are behind the scenes. And that's part of the why I wanted to write the book. I wanted to share that, from somebody that was behind the yellow tape all those nights, and make sure that people understand how hard everybody works on those cases and how much people care, especially in today's day where police are kind of up against it. And the ones I worked with over the years were some of the best people that I ever knew.
Well, I would imagine too, for you as a DA, being there when the girl finds out that her mother's dead, in a way, doesn't that more give you more of a fulfilling purpose to get justice for her, along with the hardworking cops and the hardworking crime lab? I mean, you're actually fighting for these people.
100%. My last, the when you're in trial, like my last serial killer case, that trial took 6 months, and the defense called 5 expert witnesses on fetal alcohol, saying that he'd suffered fetal alcohol as a child, which he didn't. But you have a lot of nights where you've got to be up at 6 and it's 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's just you're calculating, you're trying to balance everything you have to get done versus your level of exhaustion and how much sleep you need just so that you can effectively function the next day. And when you meet with the family and you're exhausted and you really need to put in an extra hour, that's what pushes you to do it. When you meet the crying mom that right after the charges have been filed and the defendant's been arraigned, and you sort of take them by the hand and walk them through the criminal justice system and explain everything to them, that's what you're really working for, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I covered it earlier this year, a 2-month trial of Chad Daybell, and last year covered a 2-month trial with Lori Vallow. And I'd never sat through that long of a trial to see the prosecutors every day adjusting their witness list based on what was said the day before, being ready for whatever the defense might throw at them, especially on, rebuttal witnesses and whatnot. Whereas we can walk out of the courtroom and maybe go on television and tell our story. They're up preparing for whatever the next day is. Has there ever been a time in court where you've been like completely caught off guard, or
Oh,
the defendant stands up and confesses, or things take a complete 180 and you've got to change your whole case?
every single trial, man. There's something that happens. Everyone. There's something that, because you can plan. I think is it Mike Tyson? Mike Tyson, the great philosopher that he is. He has a fantastic quote. It was, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and that's what trial is. You go in and you get punched in the face a lot. You'll have a witness that you think is a lock for you, and they come in and they're terrible, or they forget everything, or all of a sudden they're talking and you might have your own doubts about what they're saying, which is a bad thing for a prosecutor. You've got you can have somebody will get in an accident on their way in. You can have a judge that is mad at you. There's every trial, there is something that happens. Every trial it's controlled chaos, because we're dealing with human beings on one of the most human endeavors, and that's a jury trial. So our system in the United States, as well as Australia, Canada, the UK, it's based on juries, and which means it's common sense, it's life experience, it's the voices of the community. And when you're dealing with human beings on such a human level, something dramatically crazy will catch you off guard in every single trial. I tried 133. I can't remember a single one that just went smoothly from beginning to end. I mean, there's bigger and smaller catastrophes, but there's something that goes radically wrong, especially in the age of methamphetamine, because you've got, especially when you're dealing with homicide cases. I mean, there were times where half my caseload of like 20 cases would involve methamphetamine in some way, where it's on board somebody, and you could have a star witness. And when it comes to methamphetamine users, what that drug does to people's brains, they will you'll have they'll be insistent, for example, that a house was blue house with white shutters, and you go out there and they have every desire to tell the truth. It might be somebody close to them that was killed, and you go there and it's a white house with blue shutters. It'll be the exact opposite, and those people will, they can remember something when they're interviewed, and then when the trial goes 2 years later, they have no ability to recollect. And it's always a crapshoot with those guys. And that's but even people that are doing their best, a lot of homicide cases take years to come to trial, and memories fade, and people get sick, and sometimes they die. And yeah, trials it's a wild ride every single time. So that I think the best prosecutors, the best trial lawyers are the ones that can adjust on the fly. And what you witnessed on the Daybell stuff, that's a crazy case, that doomsday cult thing. But that's what good trial lawyers do. A witness will say something and they'll adjust immediately on the fly. And I used to train young prosecutors on cross-examination, and you can prepare a cross for a year. And as soon as somebody says something on the stand that you're not anticipating, that helps you, like, you really got to listen. You got to be prepared to throw away your entire cross and go down that path if it helps you. But it's hard. It's my buddy Dennis Conway, who I was in the unit with, he's called trial work a craft. It's like, it's like hanging sheetrock, or painting, or something like that. It really is. It's a skill that you develop over time, and takes. Yeah.
How did you take care of yourself mentally? I mean, being surrounded by this, or was it's just you're the type of person, this is your life, and you just do it.
Yeah, I think some of my ex girlfriends would say not very well, I think, is probably the answer to that question. You know, for me, it in a way it helped just being all in. Once I got to homicide, I never did get married. I never had kids. I was totally dedicated. And when you're totally in it and you're living it, in a weird way, it kind of alleviates some of the stress, because you're able to sleep a little bit, because you're doing everything you can. And I also worked with great people. My paralegal, Dina Basham, was fantastic. The investigators I was assigned in the DA's office, every one of them was amazing. And I worked with great cities. So, but also in my free time, I surf a bunch. You can tell by all the freckles at the end of summer. I've got sun damage to prove it. I was in the water this morning.
Nice.
So that really helps a lot. Living in LA, I grew up doing that, and that's a Zen thing, because you don't have any headphones on, and you're away from your phone, and you just you sit in the water a little bit as the pelicans fly by. And for me, it's that really helped me a lot.
Lots of beautiful beaches there where you are. So 17 years, what made you decide to leave?
So the longest anybody did in the homicide unit before me was my old supervisor, Rick King, and he did half of that as a supervisor, and he did 15 years. So most people, like the ones that are doing it as a career, they seem to last about 12 years. And I just, as tough as the job can be on some days, I just couldn't get enough of it. And so but after 17 years, of those sleepless nights and those 6-month-long trials, and we also had an election where a new guy came in, and I'd known him for years. And, there's a lot of us that decided to leave. It was probably a good time for me to go. Plus, I had a great offer from ABC News to go and do commentary for them. So I thought it was time. I was 52. I thought it was a good time to transition into something else. And truth is,
Years ago?
it was 5 years ago.
5 years ago.
5 years ago. And I miss it every day. I miss my team every day. In a way, I feel like a little bit untethered, a little bit lost ever since leaving, to be honest. I had a buddy of mine that left a couple of years before me, left the unit, and he went out, and he was also super dedicated homicide prosecutor, immensely talented. And he went onto the bench. He decided he bounced around for about a year, and then he decided he'd go be a judge. And he thinks, his big analogy is homicide prosecutors are like old samurai. And when you leave the office, you become a Ronin, which are basically just wandering samurai looking for something to do. And you kind of have one skill set, and it's trying really heavy duty cases. And I've been trying to lighten that a little bit by doing some lighter stuff, but it keeps sort of pulling me back. And now I'm defending police officers as a large part of my practice. And the longer I do that, the kind of the more serious those cases are getting. And now I'm starting to do homicide cases as a defense lawyer for cops who've been accused. And I'm really selective about the cases that I take, but they're going through hard times right now, our police.
Matt, how did you connect with ABC News? How did that offer come about?
So, being in Newport, having Newport, the murders in Newport Beach are very rare. Same thing with Laguna and Irvine. But when they happen, they tend to be spectacular. They tend to be, you know, elaborate plots and conspiracies to murder people for money, like my William McLaughlin case. That was basically the plot from Body Heat, and we did that as a cold case. That was a beautiful young woman who met an older, distinguished, divorced man who was worth, more money than, Arabian sheiks in Dubai. Like this guy was bucks up. He invented a medical technology that he sold to Baxter Pharmaceuticals. And in the early 90s, he was worth 50 million in early 90s money. So I don't know what that is, a couple hundred million today. And he gets divorced after a 30-year marriage and winds up dating the worst woman he could. And she essentially winds up getting her NFL washout boyfriend, a guy named Eric Naposki, to go and murder him so that she could collect life insurance and proceeds from the will and all that. And that case wasn't filed. So we did it 15 years later because I was one of the two cold case deputies eventually. So when you do cases like that, you wind up, you meet the field producers and you meet the camera guys, and I worked with 48 Hours on a bunch of stuff. Not worked with, they interviewed me, and Dateline, and I got to know Josh Mankiewicz and Keith Morrison, and then I did a bunch of work with 2020, where they would interview me. The office would put me up to do an interview about some of these cases. And then the field producer then soon becomes like the regional producer. And then they get called back to the mothership in New York. And by the time I was leaving, a woman I'd known for years named Lisa Soloway, who's become one of my closest friends, who I love to death. And one of the people in the arc of my life who's been probably kinder to me than just about anybody else. I ran it by her and I'm like, hey, if I left, it might be a good time for me to transition out. And would ABC have any interest in having me do commentary? And as soon as I sort of put the flyer out there, I've never felt more popular. I had a bunch of different networks that wanted to bring me in, and it was an awesome experience. So I signed with ABC News in New York, and I've been doing commentary and legal analysis for them for Good Morning America, 2020, and some other projects. I've done some Hulu stuff. I've been doing that for 5 years, and that's been amazing, really fun. And I kind of went from one team in the DA's office to this awesome team, these people at ABC that are phenomenal. That helped. That was a big, sort of a very nice transition for me. And I left right before COVID. So that contract really kind of got me through COVID and, kept me involved in the murder game, as far as, commentary and learning about cases like Koberger, and others.
You kind of did it when the true crime genre exploded. Plus, now you get to learn about all the interesting cases, as you mentioned, Koberger. So where did the idea come to write a book?
So I actually, Kelly McClear and Kevin Belf asked me to go give a presentation on no body murders in the Vegas Crime Con. Okay, so just doing murders for 17 years and being a cold case deputy, I wound up trying 5 no body murder cases. And according to Kelly, that was a very high number. There aren't many prosecutors in America that have done as many. So she wanted me to do this presentation. So
can I pause you there, Matt? So five no bodies. Have any of them been found since? Are they still missing?
Oh, they're all still missing. Yeah.
Still missing. And did you win all 5?
I won all 5. Yes. Wow. Yeah. Yeah, two death penalties, two life without possibility of parole sentences, and one was a retrial that I had to do. It was tried by somebody else, and it was reversed on appeal, and that was a second degree murder, Judy Velat. And it's a really interesting side note. In Southern California, there's two ways to effectively get rid of a human body. One is dump them in the ocean, and if you can get them out into the Pacific, not in a bay or a river or a lake, but the actual ocean, law enforcement is never going to find that. And same thing with the desert, shallow grave in the desert. The deserts of Southern California are filled with dead bodies. So they asked me to do this presentation, and it was, yeah, I mean, you've done panels at CrimeCon. It was just so much fun. And so I get up and I got my PowerPoint, and I thought, like 50 people would show up for my little horse and pony show. And there must have been 2,000 people in the room in the Vegas CrimeCon. And this is still during COVID. And I walk out on the stage, and it was kind of like a trial where I've got my little clicker in my hand for the PowerPoint slides, but there's no defense lawyer to object. I've got no judge who's mad at me, and I've got this really nice crowd of people who are there to learn and listen and hear about this thing that I've always thought was fascinating. And here I've got 2,000 people that also think it's fascinating. So it's just a blast, and it's such a nice crowd at those CrimeCon events, as you know. And I just had so much fun, and sort of like, as a DA, you're kind of a professional speaker. I mean, you're doing jury trials over and over, so you get a sense of how to work the room if you're trained properly and you do enough of them. And I think a lot of the speakers at CrimeCon, they're fascinating and they're excellent, but they don't necessarily go through that rigorous training on how to address a crowd. So the former DAs and public defenders who go and present at CrimeCon tend to get pretty high ratings. So at 2 a.m, after my thing, Kelly and Kevin had just gotten the reviews, and I got great reviews. So they called me down and they're like, "Listen, you've got to write a book, and if you write a book, we'll help you promote it." And Kevin and Kelly are just awesome. They're wonderful. So and Kelly, and I think Kelly, right? Like, Kelly's one of those women that I've just gotten used to over the years, just doing what Kelly tells me to do, because my life is so much easier if I just don't try to argue with Kelly. And she's like, "You got to write a book, and we're going to promote it, and it's going to be awesome." And that was kind of what kicked it off. I had an old girlfriend also who was a professional writer, and she really encouraged me to do it too. And it all sort of accumulated, and I thought, why not? And Disney Books liked it. I've got a great agent at CAA named David Larabelle, and he hooked me up with like a ghost editor slash writer to help me. This guy Jeremy Blackman, who is phenomenal, and he's also become a buddy of mine over this project. And essentially, I would write a paragraph, and then it would get it would go to the editors to look at, and then it would bounce around and then come back to me, and then I'd write another one, and we'd go through these different chapters. And so I had some real pros helping me structure the book. Every line in that is mine, but that was an interesting tug of war back and forth sometimes as well, because there's like the editing process it was an experience, having never written a book before. There's an editor, and then there's a copy editor, and then there's a legal editor, and then there's even a sensitivity editor, to make sure that I'm not saying anything that goes against the grain and of I guess the publisher or whatever. And there was never any issue there, but it was a very interesting process. So sometimes I'd write something that by the time it got back to me, it was I would need to almost cut and paste what I had originally back in there. But they were awesome. It was a really fun project, and they were great people. And so the book really wound up being a labor of love for me. And I'm no Hemingway, but it came from the heart, and everything in it is true. So
It's called The Book of Murder, A Prosecutor's Journey Through Love and Death. Part murder, part prosecutor's handbook, part personal memoir. The Book of Murder goes through a dozen cases and Matt Murphy's recollections of his 26 years in the Orange County DA's office. Refreshingly honest about the toll such work takes on one's private life, Murphy weaves his personal narrative through his casework in a way that humanizes the people entrusted with the duty of seeking justice on behalf of the public. Matt, why do you think so many of us are fascinated by crime?
I think it's a combination of things, and I talk about that a little bit in the book. I think that one of the interesting things about it is that in a lot of murder cases, we sort of see ourselves. We know the characters in these stories. We know that the vast majority of murders are, they're the same motive over and over again that have existed for 200,000 years. It's things like greed or jealousy. You add in a little bit of alcohol to that. Some ego, and you mix up that stew. And we know that we've all experienced that loved one or that close friend that is in a relationship with a controlling partner. I think we've all seen that. We've all known people that have had bad disputes with their neighbors. We've seen fights in bars. It's very close to us, and I think that I think in a weird way, people are fascinated because we see our own lives reflected in this, and it's almost cathartic in a way because we don't do that. You don't kill your neighbor because you got a dispute over a fence, and and also there's a good versus evil component in a way that the really interesting cases like Koberger, where you've got these innocent kids and you've got this horrific event, and we're fascinated because we want to know who did it, and we want to know if we've got to keep locking our doors in those communities. And I think that all it comes together, and also I think that the vast majority of people want to understand this stuff because they're good. They want to understand the law. Like I have a whole section in my book about, we've all heard of first degree murder versus second degree murder. What does that actually mean? What does it mean under the law? Where does that come from? Where do the concepts come from? What's a voluntary manslaughter? How do we parse out a scene where one human being has murdered another human being? I also think that sort of an unrelated component is I think a lot of people in America now are politically burnt out. I think that we're so divided that I think that in a way, true crime is almost a refuge to that, where we have good guys and bad guys again. You've got family members that we can relate to because they've lost a loved one, and you've got a dogged detective that won't give up. I mean, they say that truth is stranger than fiction, and some of the most fascinating stories I've ever heard are real ones from the homicide unit. And it restores our faith a little bit too. I think a lot of people, as they go through their daily lives, we're challenged. You got somebody road raging behind you, and there's things go wrong in relationships, and they go wrong at work, and it's a nice reminder, I think, for a lot of people that there are still good people out there, women and men in law enforcement, or the women and men in the forensic science part of this that are dedicated to getting it right. And that we really do have a lot of great judges. Some aren't so great, but most really are. And and I think it restores their faith a little bit as we go through our lives. We all go through hard times, and we've all suffered a broken heart on a Saturday night. And I think it restores our faith a little bit, if that makes sense. And then again, I don't know. I could be completely wrong on all of that, but I'm sure glad people are interested in it because I think the world is a better place when people understand these things.
Right. And it helps to have, DAs, prosecutors share the process, kind of, and pull back the curtain as you're doing in this book as to what it takes to make justice happen. The court system can be intimidating. A lot of people don't, know different words that are used. They don't know what has to be proven. So I'm looking forward to the book. The Book of Murder comes out September 17th, right?
Yes.
You can pre-order now. But I have to ask you, Matt, before you go to the dentist, crime cruise. You think about this. I'll be there too. You'll be there. Ever been on a crime cruise?
I've never been on a crime cruise. I think it's going to be a blast. I think that I mean, I went on semester at sea when I was in college, but I've never been on a cruise ship like this. I went on a cruise to Alaska with my mom when I think I was 11. But one of these massive cruise, I think it's going to be a really fun time for
Oh,
us.
so this is
And
your first cruise like ever?
basically, I mean, semester at sea, it's kind of, I mean, it was sort of a cruise boat, kind of. It wasn't exactly a cruise
Right.
like this, but no, this will be. I used to work on a fishing boat when I was 17, and then I'm going to come full circle to Royal Caribbean crime cruise thing. So I think the Crime Con, I think they sell like 500 tickets to that. I
Yeah, and
think.
it's sold out. When I talked with Kelly this morning, she said they're gone. There might be a waiting list for those of you watching though, and for those of you wondering what in the world this is, it's not a cruise where you go and commit crimes, anything like that. You'll go and hear from Matt. I'll be presenting. Chris Hansen will be on board. There's actual classes and programming that you go to, and from I've never been on the crime cruise, but from what I understand, it's a lot of fun. So much to do. And then CrimeCon, I'm sure you'll be back in Denver next year. It's back on the east or back on the West Coast next year.
Yeah, yeah, I can't wait for that. I think that I think it's going to be a blast. And also, I've never been to Denver before either, so I think that'll be fun too. I hope I get invited back after the crime cruise.
Yeah, behave yourself. Okay, so for people, last question here for you, Matt. Why should people read your book? What are they going to get out of it?
Well, I try to write this a little differently than sort of the typical true crime book. I shared a lot of. I kept a journal during my time in homicide, and not so much about the details of any case, but more my thoughts on what was going through my mind, like what goes through your mind when you watch an autopsy, and especially on a child or a young woman, and I interweave my own personal experiences and sort of you know my my own relationships and how they affected the job and how the job affected them. And I really try to make this, it's really, a lot of it is memoir. And I think that it's a little different than than just a page turner. I went to dinner with a woman in New York right when I started the process, and we were trying to figure out what kind of book it was going to be. And she sort of, I said, I've got these journal entries and maybe I should include some of these, maybe think people would think it was interesting. And she literally waved her hand. She's like, nobody's going to care about your personal musings. And it kind of hurt my feelings. So I went and I walked back to my apartment in New York that night. And I decided at that moment I was going to quadruple down my personal feelings and my personal thoughts and like really incorporate that and try to share, what that was like to the reader. And so far people have told me they like it. Not it's got good reviews on Goodreads right now, but that's really what I try to do. It's very personal in a lot of ways, and I hope interesting. And it begins as I'm trying to get over a breakup. And when I rotated in a homicide, and that was the backdrop of my very first murder scene that I went through, was, I went in with a broken heart and I'm looking at a dead body on the floor of the kitchen, and kind of I walked the reader through that a little bit, what was going through my head. And, I think the behind the scenes component of this, I think people will find very interesting. My paralegal, who I love to death, she read the book and told me she loves it, but I pay her, and so she has to lie to me if it's not any good. But I think that I really hope people like it. It's got a 4.75 on Goodreads right now after 30 reviews by people I don't know. So yeah, I hope people like it.
That's always good. That's always good that when the people you don't know give you high ratings. You can pre-order it now and then of course buy it when it comes out on September 17th. And Matt, I'm the name of your website.
Well, my website is Matt Murphy Law. You can follow me on Instagram. We're going to be doing regular updates. But
Great.
there's a bookstore I teamed up with, a little brick and mortar here in Manhattan Beach where I live. It's called Pages, and so it's pagesabookstore.com, and they're selling autographed or signed copies of the book. So if you order from Pages, you can pre-order now. from pages, and you can get a signed copy. It's also available on Amazon, also Barnes and Noble, and yeah, I'm going to be doing a book tour, and we're still kind of working out the logistics, but I'll be signing books for anybody that wants to attend any of those signings, or anybody that comes to CrimeCon. I'll sign everybody's book.
Nice. Matt, thank you so much.
I really enjoyed it, and yeah, can't wait to hang out on the Crime Cruise.
Yeah, you can teach me how to surf if they have one of those surf indoor things.
That's a deal.